Hey, what's going on YouTube? So this is the video I've been promising you guys for the last week or so, and it is, no lie, going to be a Herculean effort to get this video, just out there, especially considering my my issues with my eyes and my head and stuff. I got basically like an ocular migraine right now. I've been looking at the computer, not a lot today, but it's been a kind of a bad day for that for me. So it's going to be another haphazard video. You're going to hear lots of ums and lots of you knows, surely. So if you don't want to hear that, along with the other information that I think will be, beneficial to hear for you, the masses of people out there that want to know about what does Intel and AMD have coming in the pipeline relative to, their new CPUs, by way of next generation manufacturing processes, CPU architectures, new platforms and possible chipsets, sockets, etc., other enhancements, and above and beyond that as well. So if you want to stick around for that, it's going to be a long video. I recommend it. And if you don't want to stick around for it, if you want to criticize me down below and, chuck the deuces and go watch something else, that's totally cool. Hope you're doing well regardless. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start rolling. So, there's lots of notes. I got lots of notes, and we're going to try and cover it. So, before I get into talking about the first thing on the agenda today, which is going to be fabrication process, manufacturing process, people refer to it as, the node that people are currently working on, Intel or AMD. AMD doesn't really, have their own plants. They're not actually doing any of their own manufacturing or fabrication. They leave that to whomever currently at Global Foundries, but they can certainly use TSMC or IBM, Samsung. Shares a lot, with Global Foundries, but they can use them as well if they want. They can really use whomever they want. But talking about today's manufacturing process, before I get in to the next generation of manufacturing processes going to be used by these two companies. Obviously, they're both using 14 nanometer nodes, fabrication processes right now. Just so you guys know, this is not really apples to apples. Intel still does maintain right around a 10%, I would say, advantage in terms of transistor density. So they're able to pack more, transistors, more interconnected circuits, ICs, basically, transistors and everything else that goes on in a CPU in a given area. So that's great for Intel. They currently are using 13 metal layers on their 14 nanometer process, where AMD is only using 12 layers. AMD does have some advantages when it comes to the density of their L2 and L3 cache relative to Intel, at least on Kaby Lake. I'll show you guys some slides up here too so you can see what I'm talking about, and I'll provide some links down below so you can go do your independent research and check all this stuff out on your own if you want to. But like I say, just so you know, it's not really apples to apples. And to make things more complicated, see what I did there? Because Moore's law. You've got other things in there like fin pitch, metal pitch, CPPM, all kinds of different basically measurements of within those transistors, and that really affects your overall, how much density that you can get out of your node, out of your fabrication manufacturing process. So not all processes are created equal, and you'll see here in a little bit that even though Intel is really committed and is going to be producing, manufacturing, fabricating their chips on a 10 nanometer node, while at the same time AMD will be manufacturing their Zen 2 and Zen 3 CPUs, APUs, etc., using a 7 nanometer process, and I think their GPUs as well. Everything, Navi on will be based on 7 nanometer, 7 nanometer plus, which the plus on these different nodes just refers to enhancements within the nodes, etc. So, even more density, which leads to greater efficiency and things of that nature as well. So, so one caveat here I want to mention before we start diving into transistor density and the nodes themselves and the size of transistors, etc., is Moore's Law. Now, Moore's Law states that basically every year transistor density is going to double. That used to be realistic. That used to be realistic because silicone, which is the material that we've used for basically a long time now to manufacture our CPUs, GPUs, any kind of ICs, has been scaling down, up to this point. Well, I should say down to this point, really. And right around 10 nanometers, 7 nanometers, the atomic structure of silicone is not ample. It's not. There's not enough atoms. It's not dense enough where if you basically have 10 nanometer or 7 nanometer fabrication or nodes, the space between the gates are so small that there's not enough atoms to carry the signal. So companies like Intel and like IBM and Samsung and TSMC and GlobalFoundries, etc., are having to use more exotic materials. We've seen gallium arsenide, indium phosphide, silicon, germanium, graphene, all kinds of exotic materials attempted to being used to kind of basically improve the electron mobility, the flow of electrons, in those smaller gates, those smaller pathways. So you're going to see that, and eventually they're going to move away from silicon. They're going to have to altogether, or they're going to have to find another means of turning these transistors on and off. Right now we use electrons. And one day we may use photons or some kind of smaller particles to achieve even greater density in our ICs, so our CPUs, GPUs, etc. With that being said, again, Intel really is committed to moving to 10 nanometer. They're going to do that really later this year, and it's going to basically come to market with Cannon Lake first. I see them releasing Cannon Lake to the mainstream or the mobile markets first, as those are really smaller CPUs, and they should get better yields out of those, and those should be available before any other high-end desktop or server parts using that process, that new node technology. So AMD has already said that they are going to skip 10 nanometer and move directly to 7 nanometer. I mentioned earlier that the 14 nanometer processes between Intel and GlobalFoundries, aka what AMD is using right now for a manufacturer, are not really apples to apples. Intel still maintains a density lead over what GlobalFoundries or really anybody else can provide right now, and that's why AMD is hopping over, or under rather, 10 nanometer and going directly to 7 nanometer, is because even at 7 nanometer, Intel's 10 nanometer process is still going to be competitive in terms of overall transistor density. Just the amount of transistors that they can pack into any given die size is still going to remain competitive because they have advantages in other areas. So again, do your own research on that if you want to. I'm not going to get too in depth on this, but there's a ton of information out there, and both of these CPU manufacturers, Intel and AMD, should be working on their new nodes by the end of the year, if not Q1 2018. So that's really, really good. What that means is, regardless of 10 nanometer or 7 nanometer, anytime you do a die shrink, we saw this earlier in the year with NVIDIA's Pascal and AMD moving to 14 nanometer with Polaris. There's gains there in efficiency. There is, basically an increase in frequency is highly likely, and that's due to the fact that it's just everything's in a smaller area. So you don't have to move, you don't need as many electrons, you don't have to move them as far, and that lowers the amount of power that you have to use. So if efficiency goes up, power consumption goes down, frequency goes up. These are all good things. And then again, you're able to pack more transistors, so you're able to get more processing units, essentially, more processing power in the same area as before, or you can simply use that increase in transistor density to improve your cost, to lower your cost of manufacturing. Intel right now, I believe, is still using a 300 millimeter wafer of silicone, as is GlobalFoundries, I believe. They're using 300 millimeter circumference wafers of silicone, and they produce chips on these wafers of silicone. And right now, let's say using 14 nanometer, Intel is getting 300 chips per wafer, as is AMD. It's actually interesting if you look more into that. The size of Ryzen is actually smaller than the size of equivalent Intel CPUs, core for core even, just because AMD is actually getting more performance out of each transistor, which actually sounds crazy, but it really is a more elegant and more optimized architecture than what Intel currently has. And regardless of Intel's current node advantage, AMD remains highly competitive, obviously with the Zen Core 1 generation CPUs. So yeah, that's the first thing that's going to get better. We're going to start again seeing those die shrinks coming to market. At the very soonest, I would say, right around Gamescom this year, later in the year, or Q1 2018. Next thing on the docket to cover is architecture. Intel really has muddied this whole thing up, because they are, it was tick and talk. It was a, I think tick was the change in architecture and talk was the node shrink. And now it's like tick, talk, talk, talk. So you see I got this one screen back here, and it says Advancing Moore's Law on 14 nanometer. This was released by Intel in February of this year, and it was their just kind of foresight, their vision for what was going to happen on 14 nanometer during 2017. And we see on the left, I don't know if you can see it or not, but it says the 6th generation. So Skylake was their first 14 nanometer part, and they were supposed to have a 15% performance increase moving to Kaby Lake on their 14 nanometer plus node. And I'll be honest with you guys, I didn't see any performance increase in terms of IPC. I mean, having enhanced that process, that manufacturing process, that node, that fabrication technology, whatever, I did see, and people do see on average, that they're able to achieve slightly higher clock speeds. So there is some gain in efficiency there, But in terms of performance clock for clock, I literally see or still see no advantage, with Kaby Lake over Skylake whatsoever. So that 15% never really happened. Now, they were saying that they're going to have, another 15% gain in performance, moving to their 8th generation Core i series architecture, which is going to be Coffee Lake. And that will introduce, again, later this year, sometime around Gamescom. So, Q4 of 2017. And I just don't trust that. Like I say, I mean, fool me once, all right, fine. But it didn't pan out, moving from Skylake to Kaby Lake. So I don't really have any confidence they're going to have, more than a couple percentage points, maybe, in terms of IPC. There may be, again, some small gains to efficiency on their 14 nanometer plus fabrication, technology or node. But the good news is they're going to be offering more cores to the mainstream as well as the mobile market. So you're going to see 6-core, 12-thread parts on socket 1151. Whether or not that'll be compatible with, earlier generation 1, generation 2 chipsets remains to be seen. But they are going to release that along with a new 3 series chipset. And there has been some rumor, some talk about socket 1151 version 2, whether it's a power delivery, requirement because of the higher core count. I do see Intel really across the board, and this goes especially for their the rumored really low frequencies, base frequencies of their upcoming mobile chips for Coffee Lake, as well as their current Skylake and upcoming Skylake X parts for their high-end desktop. You're seeing very, very low base frequencies, and I think that's more of a power delivery issue. They do have very good boosting technology, fortunately for Intel, so they're able to boost really high using like TurboMax 3.0 to get a single core, to a very high clock frequency. They're able to boost up 2 cores to very close to what that single core can hit. So great clock speeds there for 2 cores. And even in situations where Coffee Lake can basically go and do a hexacore, a 6-core boost for like 4 gigahertz is very impressive. That is, I don't think that's going to be sustainable on socket 1151 given the power draw that will require personally. Now I may be mistaken about that, but it may come down to a thermal issue, it may come down to a power draw issue. If they can sustain 6 cores at 4 gigahertz, that's awesome. But I don't know about that just yet. But either way, Coffee Lake is coming later this year, and the release of Cannon Lake, really, which is just a Kaby Lake architecture, 7th generation Core i series architecture on a 10 nanometer, their next node, will kind of coexist along with that. There's still some murky water there in terms of release date for Cannon Lake, but I'll be honest with you, as always, I think personally that you're going to see, I don't know how this can't be, that you're going to see more gains to efficiency, more gains to performance with Cannon Lake over Coffee Lake, even though it's an older architecture, just because of the die shrink. There's a lot to be gained there in terms of efficiency and performance, and Cannon Lake is really what I would hold out for personally. If I was going to buy an Intel system, I would pass over Coffee Lake. I know adding a couple more cores, if it's compatible, especially with your Gen 1, your Gen 2 socket, a PCH, platform controller hub on your current socket 1151 motherboard, it might be tempting to drop that in there. And if you can sell your chip on eBay and add 2 more cores, then why the hell not? But I think Cannon Lake, even though it's 7th generation, Kaby Lake architecture on a smaller node, is going to be a better performer just because of the die shrink. Now, that's really all we know in terms of what Intel has coming, architecturally speaking. They have their 8th generation core architecture coming out, and it's going to start off on 14 nanometer in the form of Coffee Lake, and then surely it will make its way, throughout their product stack, and eventually onto that 10 nanometer node, which I believe is, I don't know, iced coffee or something, Icy Lake or whatever it is their one after that, and I believe that is going to be their 8th generation Core i series architecture on 10 nanometer plus node. So that'll be cool, but that's going to be sometime in 2018. So AMD, this is kind of weird. You guys have seen AMD's roadmaps, and it's on screen number 3 over here, and it just says, they've got Zen architecture, 2017, 14 nanometer plus. So that's Global Foundries. Again, some small enhancements to their fabrication manufacturing process. But you also see over here Zen 2 and 3 on 7 nanometer and 7 nanometer plus. Now, whether or not AMD will use Global Foundries remains to be seen. From all the research that I've done and seen, I think that they will. I think that Global Foundries, is working with AMD and Samsung as well. They share a lot of information, so I think they're going to have the best process available the soonest. I think that goes, up against anything that TSMC, IBM, other manufacturers have to offer. So I think that they will end up using Global Foundries 7 nanometer process, but with their amended WSA wafer supply agreement, they really only have to fulfill a certain number of orders with Global Foundries, and they can be whatever they want. Each quarter, GPUs, APUs, CPUs, whatever. But as long as they have to manufacture a certain number of chips, outside of that, they can make chips with whomever they like. So if it comes down to it, and TSMC has a better process, or IBM has a better process, or Samsung has some exclusive technology that for whatever reason they're not sharing with Global Foundries, they can use them, or whomever else they like. But at this point, it looks like they will go with Global Foundries, at least in my opinion. Now, this is the funny part. It's you guys know that they're going to release APUs. AMD has been known for their APUs, and to be fair, really a lot of Intel CPUs are APUs. They have integrated GPUs in them. AMD just has a different naming scheme to differentiate strict CPUs that don't have integrated graphics processing units in them, and then APUs that have CPUs as well as GPUs in them. And then you have the whole mess about integrated memory controllers, etc. But anyway, Raven Ridge, which is the desktop APU coming to AM4 very soon, will allegedly have, and again this is just speculation from unknown sources, take it with a grain of salt, but it will allegedly have enhancements that will later be incorporated into Zen 2. So maybe like a Zen 1.25 or 1.5, possibly 1.75, but some kind of incremental improvement over the current Zen architecture. And that'll be interesting to see. I'd like to do some tests with that, in condo, in-house. I don't have a house, I have a condo, so I'll be doing those tests in condo. But I'd like to do some tests with one of those APUs, disable the integrated GPU, disable one of the CCXs on my R7 1700 back here, and do some clock for clock comparisons and see if there's any IPC gains there in any applications, or gains in efficiency or otherwise. So that'll be interesting to see. But that will still be on 14 nanometer technology. Now, Zen 2 and Zen 3, Lisa Su, CEO of AMD, has been saying since before the release of Ryzen, AMD's first Zen Generation 1 architecture CPUs, that they have had, and they still obviously have teams working diligently on refining and improving the architecture, things they want to change, things they're going to implement in Zen 2, and of course in later generations like Zen 3. And the great thing I've been saying now for forever is those are all going to be compatible, socket compatible with the sockets that we are buying today. So if you have an AM4 socket, you're going to be able to just plop in, it's guaranteed. They've said you're going to be able to plop these chips in, even up to Zen 3, into your AM4 motherboard with a 7 nanometer plus or 7 nanometer plus fabrication process or node with, really even more efficiency and IPC just through changes in the architecture of these CPUs, which is going to be awesome. So in terms of how they're going to get there, one more sheet here real quick. There's a couple things they can do. Obviously there's optimizations they can make to the pathways, the branch prediction units, etc. They can optimize the cache. We've seen Intel recently on their Skylake X high-end desktop CPUs increase the amount of L2 cache available, which is great. That helps out applications and keeps things in memory that is very close to the CPU, readily available with very low latency and very high bandwidth. And AMD could certainly enhance or add more cache, refine their caching system on Zen 2 and Zen 3. They can again make other changes to the architecture, and that's going to be great for everybody. Those chips are due out in Q1 2018. Pinnacle Ridge is the successor to Summit Ridge, or the first generation of Ryzen CPUs, and again, that will of course proliferate throughout their entire product stack and get into mobile, get into high-end desktop, and get into the servers as well. One thing I want to point out before I move on to sockets, chipsets, and platforms here is what I think is the coolest part of this whole video. Maybe the video sucks, I don't know. But AMD, about 3-4 months ago, something like that, they themselves put out information, and I'm sure they did this to kind of show investors, hey, we're really serious about 7 nanometer and trying to have transparency with them and consumers. And they showed a slide saying that the Starship Server CPUs, which is a code name for EPYC 2, just as Naples was a code name for what ended up being EPYC 1 server CPUs. The EPYC, Generation 1 server CPUs that use the Zen Generation 1 cores have up to 32 cores and 64 threads. And, AMD has said that, the Infinity Fabric, which I'll touch on later, is kind of how they're breaking Moore's Law regardless of node and process improvements. But they gave something away in that announcement that I don't think that they realized they did. They've stated that on 7 nanometer in Q1 2018, these Starship or EPYC 2.0 server CPUs are going to house 48 cores and 96 threads. Now, what that means to me, and I could be wrong, but unless part of my brain got damaged earlier in the day that I don't know about, a CCX unit right now is 4 cores. it shares 8 megabytes of L3 cache amongst those 4 cores with the same average latency to any of those 4 cores. A Ryzen 7 series CPU, even a Ryzen 5, has 2 CCX units. On a Ryzen 5, I think 1 core per CCX is disabled, or 2 cores in the case of the 4-core 8-thread 1500, I believe it is. I could be wrong about that, but they basically they have 8 cores and 16 threads amongst those 2 CCX units. And I'll talk about latency and how that affects stuff later on when I get into Infinity Fabric and improvements on that. But in the meantime, I just want to do simple math here for you guys real quick. So if there is 2 CCX units per Zeppelin, and there right now are 4 Zeppelin dies on a single chip for an EPIC chip or for a Threadripper chip in the marketplace today, that gives them the ability to have 32 cores, 4 times 8, and 64 threads. Well, by announcing Starship on 7 nanometer and saying it's going to have 48 cores, 96 threads, simple math should tell us that that means that each Zeppelin unit is going to contain 12 cores. Simple math tells us again that that means that each CCX 2.0, whatever you want to call it, should contain 6 cores, 12 threads. So if that is the case, and I don't know why it wouldn't be, that means that we are going to see, CCX units, 1 CCX unit being the smallest thing that AMD is going to manufacture. So you're going to see 6-core, 12-thread chips at the low end, at least in terms of what they're going to manufacture. Of course, there may be defects in some of those CCX units on certain cores, so they can always disable those for lower SKUs that have less cores enabled. But in terms of the actual silicone transistors, cores residing on those chips, you're looking at a minimum of 1 CCX unit, 6 cores, and if they have SMT enabled, 12 threads. So that's going to mean, again, 6-core, 12-thread mobile parts, 6-core, 12-thread, I would say low-end mainstream desktop parts, and up to 12-core, 24-thread Zen 2 7 nanometer technology socket AM4 in Q1 2018, which looks really, really good. That also means that Threadripper, which apparently has 2 Zeppelin Generation 1, kind of modules disabled, and I'm sure that they do that so that they don't have to deal with all the latency issues amongst 4 Zeppelin modules. They just have to deal with the connection between 2 Zeppelin modules. They'll be able to have, if they still only want to use 2 Zeppelin 2.0 modules, those will have up to 24 cores and 48 threads in their high-end desktop platform. And the server chips, like I say, they've already set it, and this is where I'm getting all this from. Their Starship CPUs will have up to 48 cores and 96 threads, which is incredible density. Regardless of how you look at it, regardless of what numbers you throw around in terms of, fin pitch and cell height and gate pitch and minimum metal pitch, there's all these different measurements again that they take within these fabrication processes, but that right there in and of itself, the increased core count and moving to 7 nanometer, again, you should see greater efficiency, at least per core, and they're going to make improvements to the architecture as well. So that could be an absolutely huge leap for AMD, and a huge leap that is going to make its way to sockets that we're already buying today. So that is just awesome. Now moving on, I'm not going to touch on Zen 3, but expect more of the same. Refinements to 7 nanometer, improvements to the architecture there as well. But that's all I'm going to say about that. Moving on, talking about the possibility of new sockets, new chipsets, new platforms, basically, from AMD and from Intel. Now, it's a given for Intel. Every time somebody releases anything new, USB 3.2 comes out, which was going to be a, double the bandwidth of USB 3.1 Gen 2, going from 10 gigabytes a second up to 20, which is awesome. They'll put out a new chipset. They've already said they're going to introduce Series 3 chipsets with Coffee Lake. I expect Intel to release chipsets, sockets, like it's going out of style, which is not without its benefits. That means their consumers have a choice. They can have the latest technologies in terms of input-output I/O. They get the latest technologies available because there's new chipsets and sockets available all the time. That has a negative impact in terms of really consumer loyalty. At least it should, in my opinion, because it impacts us negatively in terms of having to upgrade your platform every 6 months or however long it takes. And it's just, I'd prefer if they kept things compatible with legacy, sockets and chipsets. And they may choose to do that now that AMD is really competitive with them, but they may not. AMD is going to release, they're going to release new versions of these sockets. And they're going to have to do that to keep pace with Intel in terms of technology available on their platforms. So just as you saw AM3 Plus, and you're going to see AM4 Plus, you're going to see TR4 Plus for the high-end desktop. You're going to see SP3 Plus for the EPYC server CPUs 2.0 and 3.0, or whenever those new chipsets, technologies, refinements make their way to the AMD platforms. But you're going to see things from Intel and AMD that are really important outside of just the CPU. They're peripheral to the CPU, but they're going to make a big difference in terms of overall system performance. Again, having double the bandwidth in I/O, going from USB 3.1 Gen 2 to USB 3.2 is awesome. Things like DDR5 system memory is going to be huge. Things like PCI Express 4.0 could certainly help, even though I haven't really noticed any degradation of performance personally. In gaming, going from like 16x PCI Express 3.0 down to 8x. So I don't know how much PCI Express 4.0 will actually help, but it certainly can't hurt. You may also see things on AM4 Plus, or even before that. They don't even need AM4 Plus. I showed you guys recently, Intel's 3D X-Point Optane module working on this system, an AM4 platform, but they may have deals, soon with other manufacturers, Micron or whomever's making these other technologies of low latency, non-volatile memory that can retain information when it's been turned off, and they can enable that as like a caching solution, just as Optane does now for consumers of Intel's mainstream and high-end desktop platforms. Even though I think it's completely irrelevant to those platforms and really will only impact, in my opinion, the server space, where that type of memory can be beneficial in certain scenarios. But yeah, I think it's cool that both these companies are going to have new chipsets that embrace new technologies. I think it's awesome though that AMD again is going to have that legacy support where even in 2019, 2020, you've got these Zen 3 CPUs and APUs coming out that I can still throw in my old AM4 motherboard and see a boost at least in performance from the CPU. Now, I'm not going to get, all of a sudden it's not going to magically grow USB 3.2 or USB 4 or PCI Express 4.0 or whatever, but you'll at least see the benefits there in the CPU, and I think that's awesome. One other thing I want to talk about here is super glue. Now, Intel has poked fun, they've made fun of AMD and shown, you know, that there are some latency issues by you know, having a modular design philosophy like AMD has, using 4 Zeppelin dies on an EPYC or a Threadripper CPU right now, and you know, in certain cases they're right. There is more latency having to go from one module to another than if all the cores reside on a single die and you know, have the same average latency to the you know, the L1, L2, L3 cache, etc. So you know, they have pointed out some weaknesses there, but this is really what enables AMD to beat Moore's law. Regardless of the process that they're working on, regardless of the node, AMD can simply manufacture more, you know, dies and put them on a larger chip, and then bam, there you go. You've got, you know, increased transistor count by virtue of having more chips that are just, you know, glued together, whatever you want to call it. But it's a modular design philosophy. It's very cost effective. It's allowing AMD to provide products that they wouldn't otherwise be able to provide, and it really allows them to be very nimble in terms of their product offerings. And again, they're not solely reliant on shrinking down their node, where Intel really is pressed against a wall and is just, you know, probably holding a gun to the head of their engineers, trying to get this 10 nanometer process, you know, up to snuff, where there's not, you know, there's the cost workout. You know, when moving to a new process, a smaller node, you're always going to have more manufacturing defects because it's a brand new process. So they need to get to the point where it starts to be more cost effective than the previous node that they're on. So that means, you know, if again, they're both using 300 millimeter wafers, and they're both getting 300 chips per wafer right now on 14 nanometer. Let's say you've got, you know, 25 bad chips out of those 300 chips on 14 nanometer. If you've got 30 bad chips on you know, 10 nanometer, but you're getting 400 chips, you still have a hell of a lot more CPUs that are good, even though you had more defective chips out on that wafer. So they have to get to that point, you know, to make it logical for them to move to that next node. But for AMD, Infinity Fabric right now is awesome. It's a great super glue, and it's you know, it makes everything work in terms of this modular design philosophy. But I want to talk about ways that they can improve this, and a couple of things I came up with, and I'm sure that they're working on right now, is number one, AMD have said, you know, that the basically the speed, the bandwidth, you know, the latency, etc. of Infinity Fabric is really dependent upon your RAM speed. Now, all but a single CPU that AMD currently makes, and it is, I can't remember the model number, but it's their 8-core, 16-thread EPYC server CPU. The baseline frequency for RAM on that CPU is 2400 megahertz. And it's 2400 megahertz, I believe, for all of Intel's current CPU offerings. But again, they don't have to worry about that affecting their latency latencycy to their cache. So AMD, outside of that one SKU, their current baseline frequency for RAM is 2666. Now, we've seen in test, when Ryzen was released, Ryzen 7 was released, and Ryzen 5 was incoming, I did see some YouTubers and some sites say, oh my gosh, it's going to be a huge issue having these two CCXs try and communicate with one another. They're going to have, and there are higher latencies when one core on one CCX tries to access L3 cache on another CCX. But I didn't see any impact, degradation to performance in gaming or other applications because of that, at least in the Ryzen line of CPUs that just use two CCXs. Whether that impacts performance on a Threadripper CPU that just uses two Zeppelin dies, I'm not really sure. We'll have to see how that pans out when those come out on August 10th. But I still expect performance to be very good on those CPUs, and scaling, at least in purely parallelized tasks that run in parallel, looks to be very, very good. How that will affect performance in certain applications on their EPYC CPUs that again has 4 Zeppelin modules kind of tied together, one to the other, one to the other, one to the other, and crisscross. So they do have the pathways available to have direct paths to and from one another, which is awesome. But you want to get that base frequency up to increase your bandwidth and lower your latency. So I see Infinity Fabric 2.0 really being an evolution of increase in RAM speed for one, the baseline frequency for RAM speed, as well as, if it's possible, moving those modules closer together and just decreasing the distance to further decrease the latency. So that is just some of the stuff that I wanted to get off my chest, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed this and find it a little bit insightful. If you want me to deep dive into any of this stuff, then sorry, no, just kidding, no. But I will try. Leave it down below, and I hope you enjoyed it as always. Hope you're doing well as always. And yeah, I got the system build coming out really soon. As soon as the GPU gets here for this system I'm building for my one of my clients, I will get that system build up. If you want to see any reviews on the new Gigabyte AX370 Gaming K3 motherboard, if you want to see a review on the Fantex Eclipse P400 case, I don't know why you want to see a review on a power supply. I don't really have the measurement stuff to do that with. But either of those two components, let me know. I'll be happy to do a review on those for you guys. Other than that, chuck and deuces. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.